So let's start. Today's gonna be Parashat Balak, and love to start with a prayer to get us aligned and transition into this session. So Lord, thank you for this morning. Thank you for your presence among us, and thank you for your word. Open our hearts, open our minds, that we might be able to listen to what your Spirit is telling us in this day. Yes, Lord. We want to receive from you. So use me, Lord. Use us to be able to talk and discuss and enjoy your word like honey, Lord. In the name of Yeshua, Amen. Amen. So I feel very encouraged with this portion because it's a portion where a donkey talks. So if a donkey can talk, I can talk. So I get very encouraged with this part. Plus, I have so many questions for this part that I won't get you guys into my dilemma into the donkey answering back and Balaam just answering him back. I will be freaking out if my horse talks to me or something like that. But it's a very, very interesting portion, and even the connections. So we got the numbers, we got Romans, we got John and Micah, and all of these have the same narrative. But at the same time, I was seeing that the Talmud are having the same portion this week, and I'm gonna bring today to join me a friend to be doing this teaching because I have been reading this book from Marty Schupps. You know him, Marty Schupps. He's right now the president of Tikkun Canada. He lives in Israel, and I've been going through his book. We had dinner at Tikkun, and we had very, very cool, exciting, talking about the word conversation. And he was like, "Man, you're singing my song." Yeah. I actually have a book that is about what we're talking about. And it was very unique because I've been teaching several classes, but the class that I have taught over and over, let's say my most, what's the word that I'm trying to find? Yeah, my most used class, what I feel more comfortable with all this, it's Old Testament going through the covenants. So in my head, the structure, I can start teaching that class without even notes, so it's been going through years. And we were talking about that path. In going through his book, he actually goes the same path, but he goes academic kind of stuff. So he's going the same path and providing more scriptures. So this also refers to what you're saying, and this portion also refers. And he spends several pages talking about the chosenness of Israel using the Balak Baram portion. And I just read it this week, and I'm preparing this, and I'm so I was trying to translate it and go what did I got? And then I was no, I'll just bring the book, and I'll make some notes over the book, and so we can discuss it together. But let's start by going through Numbers 22, because it will align us into what is happening. And it says, I'm going to read the first verse, and then we can go in. It says, when Balak, son of Zippor, realized all that Bnei Israel had done to the Amorites, Moab became terrified because there were so many people. Moab was filled with dread because of Bnei Israel. Moab said to the elders of Midian, the multitude will lick up everything around us like the ox licks up the grass of the field. Now Balak, son of Zippor, was king of Moab at that time. He sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, at Petor near the river in his native land, saying to him, look now, a people has come out of Egypt. See now, they cover the surface of the earth and are settling beside me. Come now, curse these people for me, because they are too strong for me. Perhaps I may be able to defeat them and drive them away from the country. I know that whoever you bless will be blessed, and whoever you curse will be accursed. The elders of Moab and Midian left with divination's fee in their hands. When they came to Balaam, they told him Balak's words. He said to them, spend the night here, I will give you an answer, just as Adonai speaks to me. So the official of Moab stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam and asked, who are these men with you? Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent word to me. See, the people coming out of Egypt cover the surface of the land. Come now, curse them for me. Perhaps I will be able to fight against them and drive them away. God said to Balaam, do not go with them. Do not curse them, for they are blessed. So Balaam got up in the morning and said to the officials of Balak, go back to your country, for Adonai has refused to let me go with you. I'm going to stop there. So there are several points that I immediately start seeing here. So we have in the big narrative, Israel has come out of Egypt. Plagues, we have talked about this deeply here. And I remember last time I was here, we talked about one of the reasons the plagues happened. It was to be a testimony to the Egyptians that he is Lord of Lords, that he is king above all kings. But also, we can find this verse where it says, like, and the nations will know about this and fear the Lord because of what I have done. And one of the first examples we have also is, well, not first, actually this is before, but Jericho, you remember the narrative of Rahab? She said, like, everyone is fearful because they have heard what the Lord did with you guys. So here happens the same. But hear that these people have come out of Egypt, and it says on verse 3, Moab became terrified. And they start giving these narratives. So when I hear a exaggerated narrative, like they're gonna lick us like the ox licks the grass, it reminds me when the 10 spies came back saying we were like grasshoppers for them. So I'm just thinking right now, oh, humans, we love hyperbole.
Yeah.
Right? We love hyperbole. I used to have a hard time with this until the Lord confront me kindly. But I used to do exaggeration to put some drama, some passion to my narratives. And there was one moment when the Lord said, like, that's lying. Like, that's lying. There's a point, there's a line. I'm not saying all drama, but in my case, personal case, I was going way beyond, and that's lying. But it's the tendency to, like, just to express this feeling, and I'm hearing them and saying, like, wow, they were really fearful, and they were spreading that fear quickly. When the king says, we're done, that word can go out very quickly. And he was so clear about his doom with these people that the only tool he has in hand to use is going to the spiritual level. He knows that in the natural, he's not going to be able to defeat them, so he goes to say, let me find somebody, a prophet, somebody can do divination and can curse them, because I need the intervention of the supernatural, of the spirits. And it's very unique and definitely something that I would like to discuss with you guys, because he hires Balaam, or tries to hire Balaam, and Balaam says, well, let me contact Adonai. It says in verse 8, just as Adonai speaks. And that's very unique, because even on the verse 10 and 11, it's used the word God, Elohim, said Elohim. And I was like, okay, so maybe it's not Adonai. But then it closes on 13 saying, for Adonai has refused me. So I'm like, how did Balaam got to meet Adonai? That's quite interesting. Who are you, man? Like, but the Lord is speaking to this prophet and telling him, hey, no, I don't want you to go. In a very unique, and we'll see how this unfolds, because Balak is going to spiritual war because he knows in the physical he's inferior. Tries to buy Balaam. Balaam asks Adonai, and he says, do not go But then, after the second encounter, eventually he goes and he's riding. That's where we get this scene, right? He's riding his donkey, and the angel of the Lord appears to him. The same way he will appear to Joshua, standing in the middle with a sword open and standing like a warrior. The Lord of the angel armies stands in the way, and Balaam cannot see him, but the donkey does. And the donkey, hija, Java, ¿te ayudo? ¿Te ayudo? Te ayudo porque está haciendo un poco de ruido. Can I help you? I'm just hearing plastic going on. So.
Well, that is strong.
That's not kids friendly. Okay. Sorry. So he gets this encounter. The donkey sees him, and Balaam gets mad because the donkey is not obeying him. But the response of the donkey honestly got me for a few minutes. I was doing some notes, and I had to stop just because of the meekness of the donkey. After he hits him 3 times and gets out of there, and even like goes hard on him and starts hitting him, he's like, "Why are you doing?" The Lord opens the mouth of the donkey and asks, "Why are you hitting me? Am I always like this to you? I'm not taking you, have I not taken you to one place to another, always being very obedient, and suddenly you are hitting me?" And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of meekness. If I was a donkey, I would have done more bucking and kicking and biting and, yeah, more rodeo in there. But the donkey was like, "Why are you doing this to me?" And then Balaam, this part gets me also, answers back. Instead of freaking out because the donkey's talking, he answers back and said like, "Well, if I had a sword, I will kill you." And I'm being confronted. I'm reading that and I'm like, oh my, how stubborn can, I'm not going to say we, but how I be when I get like into something, right? So just that was a very, very small parenthesis, like, wow, the meekness of the donkey is provocative. But finally, he goes there. And 4 times, he's going to be doing 4 oracles. And that's where I want to invite my friend Marty to join us. Because in talking about these oracles, we can see bigger themes that I would love to talk about. So, the first one is referring to the choosing of the nation. I'm gonna read just these 2 pages, just my highlight parts. It says, when God chose Israel as his treasured possession among all peoples, referring to Exodus 19:5, he demonstrated the relationship he established between Israel king, and the nations. That's what we're gonna talk about. Israel king, and the nations. The grounds for this election were God's ownership and authority as the creator. And he has several chapters referring like how the nations were created, were they a response of the Babel Tower, or they were in God's heart from the beginning. He argues with that. But also he goes into the choosing of these 70 plus 1, this one new nation called Israel. And he's able to choose them, and the grounds is because he is the creator, the author. But then he says, they had been slaves with no status, no domain within the government, or any national self-determination for 400 years. So basically, he's taking the least of the people to make this nation. By entering into covenant with Israel, he transformed them from the lowest nation to the nation above all. Israel was described as a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, a nation that has been called to be separated among the others, separated from the others, to be a nation of priests to the rest of the nations. Just think about that for a moment. Israel was created to be separated. That's where we get the Israel and the nations. God sees Israel and the nation. This is a whole worldview. When you are able to see humanity as Israel and the nations, with a clean heart, without the trouble, that's a completely big shift. But it talks about priesthood. So it says, all priesthood function as intermediaries between the people and the divine. So going again to Exodus 19:6, Exodus ordained the whole nation as priesthood to represent all the nations to God and God to all the nations. But here's where we got connected with Balaam. Inasmuch as the Torah highlights the authority of the high priest, the Torah also anticipates a king who will rule over Israel. Genesis 49:19, a king was to come from the line of Judah. I don't know if you have read, I have mentioned several times, Genesis 49 is when Jacob is dying and he's prophesying over all of his sons, and eventually he reaches into Judah. And that's a very beautiful passage to read on. Genesis 49. It says, Judah, so you are, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on your enemy's neck. Your father's son will bow down to you. A lion's cub is Judah. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches, lies down like a lion or like a lioness. Who will rouse him? The scepter will not pass from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs will come. To him will be the obedience of all peoples, of the nations. Binding his foal to the vine, his donkey colt to the choice vine, he washed his garment in wine, and in the blood of grapes he struck. So, we can see in Genesis 49 that Judah is prophesied that a ruler will come out of him. That's where the first mention we get the Lion of Judah, although in that moment it's just the cub of Judah, right? It's the first mention. In Balaam, in his oracles, is going to talk about this. It says the Balaam oracles within the book of Numbers provide significant information regarding Israel king that supports Jacob's prophecy in Genesis 29. So, let's go to our first one, Numbers 23:9. Numbers 23:9. If you have TLB, I noticed that several translations it's different verse, but if it's not 9, it's one below, one above. In this part it says, for from the top of the crags I see him, from the hills I behold him. Behold, a people dwelling alone and not counting itself among the nations. In TLV it says, from rocky peaks I see him, from the heights I behold him. Look, he lives as a nation apart and does not consider himself as being like other nation. So here we got a reference how this first oracle confirms that Israel is a nation that is not identified within the nations. So we have this distinction. There's another scripture that provides understanding that Israel and the nations' worldview is biblical. And here we have Balaam saying this very openly, a nation that is not counting itself among the nations. So this is not something new for us, but definitely seeing it through Balaam's oracle, it's been very powerful. Because, again, what was the purpose of creating Israel at the first place? Genesis 12. What is the purpose of the creation of Israel? I will bless you, and if you go to the end, and in you, all the families on the earth will be blessed. So identity and purpose are tied up. They cannot be separated. They cannot be dissected. You cannot say like, oh, Israel, it's this, if you don't get the part of purpose. From the beginning, when they were just a promise, God had already intended plan of redemption for all the nations. So that's why he sees them as Israel and the nations. But then, so let's continue with what Martin is saying. It says, from the divine perspective, the world is divided into two distinct groups, Israel and the nations. Israel and the nations are set in a relationship, and here's the clue, of mutual blessing together for God's purposes. And actually, this is going to connect two portions that we're studying. Numbers, we're seeing in this part, but also we got Romans 11 this part. And what does Romans 11 talk about? If we have to put it in a nutshell. How would you summarize Romans 11 to your Uber driver? I just had quite a unique conversation with my Uber driver right now.
That God did not reject Israel.
God did not reject Israel. That would be a good nutshell summary. What else? What does Romans 11 talks about? It's like, hey, you should check Romans 11 because it talks about
Israel and the nations.
About Israel and the nations. So it talks about the chosenness of Israel. Yes, I will use that chapter to talk about that. It talks about Israel and the nation perspective. It's not one or the other, one above the other, but one with the other. Mm-hmm. And there's a third response that I'm looking for. I'm going to give you a clue. So Genesis 12 shows us the role of Israel.
So that all the nations can come in.
Exactly. So Romans 11 gives us what? Is the counterpart. The role of the nations towards Israel. And suddenly these two chapters come along in this, what I think Martin is saying in this mutual blessing. So Israel, when you take your place, when you walk in your identity, the nations get blessed. Right? It overflows. As a priestly nation, it overflows. But Romans 11 says, nations were called to provoke Israel to jealousy. Being grafted into the tree. Calling upon the God of Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, and Jacob. Suddenly you have, I remember having a Jewish neighbor, and we'll be talking about Old Testament and God of Abraham, and sometimes you can feel like he kind of like, well, you know more than I do, and that might be unique. It's like, who are you? I had a conversation with some teenagers here at Hen House, and they were Jewish, and I knew this because they were being very loud in the supermarket, and they were being loud and funny and something like they were like grabbing attention from the people, and when they were paying, the guy offered something or said something to them, and he yelled like, no, I'm Jewish, and they went out. So I was like, I got that far. So when I come, they're literally standing outside on the parking lot, eating sushi on the parking lot on a Friday night kind of thing. And I'm like, hey guys, I start talking to them. Long story short, they describe themselves like Jews, but they don't believe in God, so they believe in that higher power, but they're not very religious, and like just going to describing that. But then he asked me like, how about you? And I said, well, I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you can see his eyes going like something was not clicking in. And we have such hard work to accomplish Romans 11. It's a very big task. Because sadly, these verses have been used to refer to many not proper teaching. I remember having a pastor in Monterey. I've been talking a lot about Israel. He's not pro-Israel in any sense, but he's open for dialogue, and we have had conversations for a long time. And one time I was going through some verses, and he says, and I mentioned Romans 11, like provoking Israel to jealousy. He's like, well, but what does that mean? Sending money to Israel. He was very upset. He was like, that's it. We have taught that you have to pray and we have this, and that means for him it was like poof. It was narrowed down by history that provoking Israel to jealousy was sending money. But also, I have a conversation with other people that calling, and this was recent, not more than a month ago. I had this conversation with people that have influence in ministry, and they're like, yes, that's why we're going to be keeping kosher, and that's why we're going to be doing this, and that's why we're going to do this, because how are we not going to reach them if they don't see us walking in the Torah of Moses? And I'm like, the Lord gave us. Like, I mean, they were passionate about it. They were passionate about it. I remember living that, and I was like, Rich, I need to talk to you. Get some help. Some help. I mean, because they were convinced. Truly convinced. Because if you allow yourself to go into that path a little bit, it kind of be like, well, it makes sense. But then if you actually go that path, you will find that it doesn't make sense. So it's just a little bit, so just the surface that it might be like, oh, it makes sense, but I don't know. Why am I bringing this up? This mutual blessing, for us, it might be very easy to say, yes, I'm all for it. But I just felt that we need to stop and pause a little and say, like, Lord, help us, because out there, the worldview that the Lord sees the world as Israel and the nation is not common. Most theologians will say the Lord sees sinners and saved.
Yep.
That's the most common worldview. He sees humanity as saves and sinners. Church people and non-church people. Another word to say it, Christians and non-Christians. And when you have that perspective, you will see the Bible that way. You will call Moses Christian, and you will call everyone Christian, or not Christian. But seeing the chosenness of Israel is important for world redemption, for everything we believe and trust. And to be able to take our places, so Israel, Jewish people, need to take their places. ¿Puedes sentar en el sillón, por favor? Porque distraes, mi amor. O vete para atrás. Llévate la silla para atrás. Sí, llévatela para atrás para que no distraigas. Sí. O allá hay otra atrás, mira, hay otra atrás. Okay. So, Jewish people has to embrace this. Truly. Any teaching that goes and diminish the Jewishness, the relevance of the Jewishness in the Jewish people, I don't think it's correct. But the same happens with the nations. We need each other, and this is so important. So important. So, the first oracle mentioned that is a nation, Israel is a nation apart, and these two come together. But the second oracle, if you go to 23 verse 21, Balaam's second oracle speaks directly about Israel kings. So we have been talking that they're a priestly nation, but there has been, even from the beginning, Genesis, even if we go Genesis 3:15, there's one coming that is going to crush the serpent's head. But in Jacob, we hear that is going to be a ruler, is going to take a scepter that is coming from Jacob. But how does it say? Number 21 and 24 says, the Lord their God is with them, and the shout of a king is among them. God brings them out of Egypt, and is for them like the horns of a wild ox. Behold, a people, as a lioness it rises up, and as a lion it lifts itself. It does not lie down until it has devoured the prey and drunk the blood of the slain. So the first reference we found is that God is identifying himself as Israel king in this passage. And we actually can see that because God is himself is delivering Israel like the horns of a wild ox. Do you remember the words of Balak when he was afraid? How he describes, oh, they're gonna lick us like an ox. So even the prophecy, I'm assuming Balak is like, oh man, I knew it. Like he already mentioned those words, and Balaam is just confirming it. And God is saying, I am the king. I am the king that is coming with Israel. So the king is already with Israel. That's what this oracle is saying. But if we go to the third one, this is very interesting. It says on 24 verse 7 or 8, pending. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God brings him, you know the difference? On the first one it says God's bring them out of Egypt. But now he's referring to him. God brings him out of Egypt, and it's for him like the horns of the wild ox. He shall eat up the nations, his adversaries, and shall break their bones in peace and pierce them through his arrows. He crouches, he lays down like a lion, and like a lioness, who will arouse him up. Does this verse sound like something? You just mentioned Genesis 49. Jacob's prophecy is describing you are a cub, like a lion, like a lioness. You crouch. He's literally making this connection. But if we put together these two oracles, the first one says that God himself is the king among them. But then it says like there's a king among them. A him. There's also a him that has that rulership. How can that be possible? How can God be with them, but also a him being a king? I mean, we know this answer. It's not hard for us, but following the oracle's thread, it's helped us to see a narrative. Israel was chosen to be a holy nation, a priestly nation, but also the Lord was going to rise up a king among them, and he's doing all this process, being himself a king for them, but he's also calling a him, a man, that is going to take the ruler out of them. So, not only the shout of the king is among them, but a specific king is mentioned. I love this. And he says, on the first one, God brings them out of Egypt, but the second one, or let's say the third one, God's bring him out of Egypt. I cannot not make the connections with Matthew. Matthew 2:15, where he said, let me read it to you very fast. Matthew 2:15. Matthew, come on, Matthew, help me out. Almost there. Matthew 3, Matthew 2:15. It says, he stayed there until Herod's death. This was to fulfill what was spoken by Adonai through the prophets, saying, out of Egypt I call my son. He's quoting Hosea 11:1. And this can lead us to a very good and profound rabbinic debate. He's referring to Israel, and here we are. No, he's referring to Yeshua. I will argue he's referring to both. Just as the oracle is mentioned. The first one is regarding as Israel as the son, and the king is God himself. He's guiding them. He's among them like a shout of a king's. But then he also, yes.
Taking a music stand.
Okay, it's okay. You need one?
There's one.
Awesome.
One short. So.
But also, there's a specific king that is being mentioned. And Matthew makes this connection. And that's why when he's referring to the Mary and Joseph narrative, he says to this, so that these may be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I have called my son. But the fourth oracle, I think this is very interesting, makes a note about this king, this human king. And he says that this king is yet to come. Let's read it together. So Numbers 24, verse 17. I'm going to read from the TLB. It says, I see him, yet not at this moment. I behold him, yet not in this location. For a star will come from Jacob. A scepter will arise from Israel. he will crush the foreheads of Moab and the skull of the sons of Seth. So let's Selah in there for a moment. I love this 4 oracle. I'll say it's my favorite from the 4. I see him, just imagine, because later on the prophet is going to refer himself as the one that has seen the Lord. I see him yet not at his moment. How can this be? He just said that God is among them, guiding them. He delivered them. So it's among them, yet is not yet there with them. You see the tension?
Mm-hmm.
We call this the kingdom now, but not yet. This kind of tensions, right? So he's here, but he's coming. Like he came, but he will return. This tension is so unique. And we need to allow ourselves some mystery, but also get into the struggle of how, Lord? What are you saying here? What is Balaam and Barak understanding? Like, he's there, but he's not there? What is it? But definitely, Balaam has something very clear. The fact that he's quoting constantly Jacob's prophecy over Judah. He's seeing clearly that there's a nation chose among all the nations, in which, Genesis 12, all the nations will be blessed. Nobody, remember how it says, nobody can curse what he hasn't cursed. In Genesis 12, what do we got? I will bless you. And those who bless you, I will bless them. And those who curse you, I will curse them. So we have already this, like, Israel is being backed up by God. Like a big brother, like a father saying, like, hey, nobody's going to mess up with you. I'm going to be with you. You have a purpose to fulfill. And I'm going to be with you. I'm going to put my name on it. That's what he's saying. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. That's in modern language what he's saying. And Barak is trying to go against that instead of aligning. That's a whole other narrative that I would love to get into that. But what was the proper response of the king, of the kings of the nations, till this day? Psalm 2. Kings, be wise. Kiss the son. Right? That's what Psalm 2 says. But kiss, yeah, suddenly the light just comes up. I love it. So, going back to what we're having here, let me read this final paragraph from the book. It says, Balaam's oracle were inspired blessings upon the nation, not reckoned among other nations. A nation standing alone, chosen by God. God is their king, ruling among them, and yet there is an appointed king who mysteriously travels among them and is also still to come. Balaam reference to the imagery of a lion standing over his prey, first employed by Jacob to speak of the future king who will come from the line of Judah, to whom all nations owe allegiance and obedience. Both Jacob and Balaam reference a king of Israel yet to come who will have dominion over the nations. So, when we get this part, and we connect it to the other portion that we had, Romans 11. I don't know, I just think about the end of Romans 11, how Paul is trying to describe it, and he just explodes in exaltation, saying like, oh, how, I don't know how you say it in English, but it says like, how beautiful, how majestic. Let me read it. Because in Spanish, it has a very not common word, cuán inescrutables. I don't even know how to say that in English. Inescrutables. Does that sound like something? Let me see. Inescrutables means that you cannot know them fully. Inescrutable means that it cannot be known to the full.
The English word is inscrutable.
There you go. So do you use that word often?
It's
like
not a very used word.
Okay, the same in Spanish. So the Bible said like, oh, how unscrutable are your thoughts, Lord. Something like that. That's what it says in Spanish. But It's not very commonly used. Unsearchable. There you go.
Unsearchable and incomprehensible.
There you go. Somebody there to translate the inescrutables. But I love it. Oh, the
Yes.
depth. I love the first word is my favorite one. Verse 33. The first word. Oh, that's the best answer you can give to theology sometimes. Right? Oh, the riches, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how incomprehensible his ways. For who has known the mind of Adonai, or who has been his counselor, or who was first given to him, that it shall be repaid to him? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. I love that last part. That part of Romans 11 gets me. Like, suddenly you get like a Paul you can relate with, right? He's not just going very deep theologian. He's going like, oh, this is way beyond my head. That's what I'm listening here. This is amazing. But the last part, to him, from him, through him, and from him, through him, and to him are all things. And what are the context of the things? Is he talking about things? He's talking about nations. So from God belongs all the nations. All the nations belong to them. Through him, all these nations come to understanding, to their purpose and identity fully. Honestly, I'm dreaming of the day of the Lord when we're going to be able to listen to the testimony of the nations, not only the people. That's something that gets me. How beautiful will be when we hear the testimony of Zimbabwe, of Japan. Oh, we struggled with this for centuries. My family is from Catalonia, Spain. And if you know a little bit of history about Spain, that area of Catalonia, it's been polemic. It's like a little Jerusalem. It's been fought over for centuries and centuries and centuries. Till this day, we still have struggles. And I've been going through that history a lot. And it feels hopeless. I don't know if you have gone through some history and feel that tension. It feels like hopeless. But then I remember these words. And through him, I'm longing to hear the Catalonian testimony that is going to be seen and proclaimed in the age to come. And we can start living it right now, but and this is the same for, I don't know, your ancestry. But think about it. All of this is the narrative we belong for. The restoration of the world. So I'd like to make a pause to start an interaction. I laid a little bit with the help of Martin. We went through Balaam oracles. But not just through the oracles, but to this great story, actually. We just went to the big story of the chosenness of Israel, the king of Israel, and the nations. I would like to hear what are some thoughts, feelings, doubts. What is this that we have been sharing for?
I would just like to comment on your last statement. How wonderful it's going to be to see the earth restored back to its original beauty without all the junk that we put on it. Yeah.
How beautiful will that be? And how beautiful that it's been in the remnants of every country. I shared traded interpreter says this, and I love it. It's one of those phrases that I heard once and I just like got them. It's like, you want to know a country? Get to know their remnants, their remnant. And I was like, that's so true. Like, that makes sense. That makes so much sense. You want to know a country, get to know the remnant. Oh my goodness. So I love that is coming. And I'm looking forward for that. We're gonna be coming. I'm very passionate about that. I had a conversation with another pastors, and they were saying like, yeah, we believe in diversity, but in days to come, that's not gonna be there. And I'm like, Lord, give me a lot of wisdom. And I'm like, how will that not be? And I argued with this in particular. Well, like, how will not be like the Lord went through tons and all of this, and suddenly we're gonna be like, oh yeah. But that testimony, leave it on this side of the world. We won't need it over there. I was arguing for the testimony's sake. I'm like, that's glory and worship. When I see that we're going to be worshiping, I don't believe we're going to be in diapers in clouds singing. Honestly. It's going to be a more complex worship than just singing. And the testimony of people, that's going to be definitely a thing. But the testimony of the nations. I mean, we got an example with Israel, right? I don't know, in the 80s when the revival was happening in Mexico, there were a lot of Hebrew inspired songs that spread along. And there was one that my wife will be very embarrassed if I sing this, but it will be, it says in Spanish, it throws to the sea the chariots of Pharaoh, and it's describing, but in a very like da 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 da. So in that, just imagine that narrative, and I remember like till this day I hear that song that is super old, and it's like, oh, it's a testimony, it's an hymn. It's like, yeah, he did this, and he threw to the sea, and then you shout and make all these like interactive singing. Oh, imagine like from all the world, definitely that testimony is remaining.
It makes me think of, I'm trying to remember now what country it was. Now I can't remember. But at the conference, during the leadership portion, Troy Wallace was speaking, and he was sharing some things about Jewish Voice and what they're doing in Africa. And he showed a video.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Zimbabwe?
I think so.
It wasn't Ethiopia.
No, it was not Ethiopia.
I think it was Zimbabwe, but basically, I might be wrong on that, but I think it was Zimbabwe. And basically, the Jewish community in Zimbabwe, they had just gotten, in the entire country, this one congregation had just gotten a Torah scroll. And in the country, there's exactly one person who can camp from the Torah. He shows this video that they get the Torah. I'm going to cry. I cried when I watched the video. So they're processing the Torah, right? It's these Jewish believers, Messianic believers, processing the Torah, and they do the liturgy, they do it in Hebrew, and then spontaneously, they start worshiping while they're processing the Torah in their native language.
Oh, yeah.
And dancing, and it was, I mean, just like all the African beauty you can imagine. Dressed, processing the Torah. Like, it was incredible. And it's like, it's exactly, like, that's what I'm thinking, like, exactly what you're saying. It's like, yes, there's unity in the tradition and in the Torah, like, they're centered around the Torah, but they're worshiping and the joy.
Yes.
Like, having this first time they get to have it, and like, the worship that rises up from them is in their language and in their culture, and it was like, I'm serious. Like, I cried when I watched the video. Yeah. Because that's what I love, and I've shared it in service before. Like, the Lord has given me this picture of all the nations coming to Jerusalem when Yeshua is enthroned. Yeah. And so I'm watching this video, and I'm like, that's a piece of what I see is all these nations coming. And like, yes, it's all this unity of worshiping Yeshua, because he is, after all, of course, the living Torah. Yeah. But it's all with this, we all keep our culture, we keep our identity of our culture, because he, like Tom always says, especially in the Grafted Youth Course, God desires this big, diverse family. Yes. This big, diverse, unified family. Yeah. But unity doesn't mean we don't have the unity with the distinction, and we don't carry our culture, because that's what the Lord loves. So
I love it.
I just
Amen to that. That is definitely a good example of what I was referring in
Yeah.
real life, with a real testimony
Yeah.
of what is going to be seen in there as a whole nation, but also what is already seen in here. So they're grasping that reality into right now in a very powerful way.
And
So,
that shows the unity of it that you were so touched.
Mhm.
It's not the unity of being the same, it's the unity of Him. And,
Yes.
and that's what brings the unity, where we have gotten mixed up, means that unity means we're all the same.
yeah.
And that's,
I mean, that's why I keep bringing. There's some stuff that we're already agreeing on this at KL in a Torah study. I'm assuming most of you like, yeah, I agree with this. But going through the details, it's good. It's good to go to the struggle, because it's very easy to say, yeah, I'm pro-Israel, but like, what does that mean? I mean, Mike just posted on his Instagram, Mike Bickles, talking about this. Like, I'm pro-Israel. Like, no, I am pro the narrative of the Bible for Israel, and that's a difference. And he goes in to explain like
Yeah.
why like you can end up in your excitement being pro-Israel, and suddenly you are like pro a lot of things that are not biblical because you are pro-Israel. You can do the same. I'm pro-Mexico, and it's like, oh, actually, he's very determined to purify that nation. He will. But the biblical narrative, and suddenly all this beauty of diversity, unity, but purified. Purified. Trying to find the word, like the distinction is purified, and the culture. So all that leads into a beautiful worship. And I love how all of these that we're talking, and it makes so much sense right now. And Romans 11, we can put it really next to Numbers 22 and 23. But at that moment, think for a moment, they're just coming out of Egypt. Most of these things we're talking about have not happened, and it's already been spoken so plainly. A king is coming. So personally, I feel that the Lord is killing two things in my theology. One, the nation is not my reaction to Babel. It was in my heart. And the kingship is not my reaction to Saul. It was in my heart. Suddenly, you start getting like, hey, I had a plan. And like I really like to say, God has only plan A. He has not plan B nor plan C. He only has plan A. What else is coming to your hearts, minds, questions, connections?
I was just thinking about maybe one of the reasons we get confused about like unity or like looking all the same is because like I was thinking about the idea of Malachi, like the refiner's fire, and actually like you know that something's pure when like if you talk to somebody who actually does like refining of silver, you know that it's pure when you can see a reflection in it. But we get confused that like God's character and beauty is so big that it can't be reflected in one people or one nation. So like we all will look like Him, but we reflect different aspects.
Yes. 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 The diversity. I mean, even with male and female. That's huge. That's one argument I use with several of my replacement friends. I'm like, they are very, very into like male is the head of the woman. They're very strong to that doctrine. I'm like, how can you like? That's very easy for you to see unity with distinction, and you cannot see unity with distinction here. How do you see that? How do you make that line? Oh, this chosenness I agree with, but this chosenness I argue with. Like, oh, actually, the same guy that, well, I'm going to call him guy, the same God that chose that we are male and female shows that there was Israel and the nations. There are a few things that the Lord chose, like divinely appointed. And that is one, so that's huge. That is huge. So, again, this narrative of Balak trying to curse, being afraid and calling upon the gods to stop these people that was coming up to him, trying to save his life, instead of aligning with the truth. I see us nations, that's our call. That's why I quote Psalm 2, like, to respond, it's in alignment. And as we align to him, and we align, this is the tension with Ishmael. But I want him, like, when you align, the blessing, there's blessing for all the nations. I just had one beautiful meeting. I shared it as a testimony this week. It was a very unique, I even took a picture on my screen. In one corner, I had a Jewish guy that has a ministry to reach all the Muslim people. And on my other square, I had an ex-Muslim guy that has a passion to teach about Israel to the nations. And I'm seeing that, and I'm like, that is so neat. Mm-hmm. This guy grew up Muslim, like literally, he's the grandkid of the most influential Muslim guy in Mexico. He paid the first mosque in Mexico, and all, like, he's a very influential. And I came to the Lord. He's a minister, and he has a passion and a heart for Israel. And you see a Jewish guy grow up as Orthodox and all this, and now the Lord has called him to spend his life and preach the gospel to Arab nations. And I'm like, what in the world is this? But it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I'm from the nations, so in a way I was just like, oh, how unscrutable. What was that word?
Inscrutable.
Inscrutable are your thoughts, Lord. You are unique. But that is amazing. That is the beauty of the body we belong. That is the powerful narrative the King of the world, the King of Israel carries. And he still determines to bless all the families in there. Ephesians 3:15 or 16, I don't remember. It says, in whom all the families of the earth receive its name. I think there's a very strong connection with Genesis 12. Like, really, Paul is thinking of this when he's writing this. In Ephesians 3, when he's talking about the one new man, the joining of the nation, the mystery that has been revealed. Oh, the mystery has been revealed. We are part of it. Yet, we get to see it, the blueprints, even from the lamb's words and mouth. Thank you to that donkey that stopped. So more insight. We still have 10 minutes. A little bit more. I need to leave 5. I'm open in service, so I need to at least have 5 minutes to transition. Go. Ponte zapatos, Ime. Yes.
What stood out to me in reading the portion this time around was how all of this was happening for the nation of Israel without their knowledge of what was going on based off of what we read in Scripture. And how the Lord was protecting them from curses, that he was having blessing pronounced upon them, even throughout these evil intentions to do so. But he was just doing all of this without their even knowledge of what was going on. And so it just made me think of all the so many times that he's doing the same thing for us.
Oh, yeah.
And how he's actually doing the same thing for Israel now.
Yeah.
Like, the majority of them have no knowledge of his working for them and in light of them to bring them to their fulfillment, but he's still doing it regardless. Like, his plan is being fulfilled. And I'm just so thankful that he moves even when we have no idea what he's doing.
That's such a good point. Thank you for bringing it out. That's so true. He the one who does not sleep, is watching over Israel and over all of us. So yeah, that's a very important thing. Yeah. They have no clue, right? They're like,
No
oh,
idea.
we're camping in here, and all of these things are happening over there. That's so amazing. Yes.
Well, I kind of, not going a different direction, but
Go for it. Go.
kind of, so right off the bat, you know, with the Parashat Balak,
Mm-hmm.
Balak meaning destroyer.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got right off the bat, you know, Moab became terrified because they were so many and they were filled with this dread. So we see this second generation, we see this same type of narrative, this dread of these people that the Pharaoh in Egypt had.
Mm-hmm.
And his thought is, okay, let's destroy these people. So he tries to physically kill them.
Yeah.
But now we've got this second generation who's getting ready, hopefully soon, to go into the wilderness. And we now have another king rising up who's like, yeah, let's destroy these people. His tactic is different. Now maybe he knew you can't kill these people.
Yeah.
It didn't work in Egypt, you know. So let's curse them
Yeah.
instead. But we again have this where we go all the way back to Genesis with the serpent wanting to kill the seed.
Oh,
Then
yeah.
we have the king of Egypt wanting to kill the seed. Now we have the Moabites. Let's curse the seed.
Yeah.
Let's go after this seed.
Mm.
And then the Lord does this beautiful thing, and you know, no, he doesn't strike Moab with the plagues like he does Egypt, but he raises up a man who's not an Israelite
Yes.
to prophesy their destiny. You will not kill my seed.
Yeah.
And so we have these oracles of that. So where, once again, the enemy means to destroy,
Mm.
the Lord prophesies blessing over that. And so I just kind of look at this, there's so many parallels when we get to the end of Numbers and into Deuteronomy where we see foreshadowing of what that first generation went through, and now this second generation that's getting ready to go into the land, we're seeing the Lord's determination that what I started will be completed.
Yes.
And I think the prophecies that's brought forth, and we know Balaam's not a righteous man. I mean, we see what ends up
Yeah,
happening later. But the fact that I've read that Jewish scholars kind of refer to Balaam as the donkey. There's a parallel, like
Oh.
in reality, in some ways, Balaam is a donkey, you know. And I don't really want to go off into that area, but we still see that the Lord can use anybody
Oh yeah.
to declare his purposes. You know, you kind of want to think, well, he'll only use clean vessels and it'll be set up. No, he had a plan, and originally he said, don't go do this. Okay, well, you're going to do it. Okay, well, then you're going to say my word, whether you really want to or not. And I don't for a moment believe that Balaam understood half, if any, of what he was prophesying, because he couldn't have. But I mean, he's even talking about the dust of Jacob. He's talking about, this is mind-blowing. This is the Lord speaking this forth.
Yes.
This is what's going to happen. You think you're going to curse? No. This is what's going to happen. You think you're going to destroy my people? No. They're going to be blessed, and in fact, a king's going to come. And it just over-amplifies what this king originally meant to do. And I love that in that.
Yes.
And it was just like, so yeah, I just kind of was focused on that. Satan tried to destroy in the garden,
Yes.
you know, the destiny. Pharaoh tried to destroy the destiny. Now this guy, let's curse these people and destroy their destiny, and the Lord's not having it.
Yes. I agree. I agree. Thank you for sharing. That's beautiful. Yeah, he's determined. Again, he has only plan A. He will fulfill it. And it's our invitation to respond in alignment to his plan. And his plans includes chosenness. And that's something that might be hard for some people. But he does choose. Not out of privilege, not out of, how do you say, like, preferidos, like favorite ones.
Preference.
They have out of like, oh, you're my spoil, like my most important. No, it's actually out of duty, out of purpose. So there's just the way he did it.
Well, it's interesting too that all this happens kind of, I mean, I don't know, maybe it says in there somewhere and I don't remember right now, but that all this is happening and basically through this very strange way, God is kind of reaffirming, like you're saying, he's kind of reaffirming the chosenness of Israel and even of Judah's line with the king. And all this is on the heels of Korah and Moses hitting the rock instead of speaking to it and not being allowed to go into the land, and the bronze serpent. Like, all this is after all of this, like, guys, you're kind of really screwing this up here. Like, you know, but it's still like, and then all of a sudden there's all this prophecy and all this blessing coming from this pagan prophet, basically. So it's this interesting, like you're saying, it's basically God's like, no, I chose you. I'm still choosing you, even though you've had some massive error very recently. We're still moving forward because, like you said, he only has plan A. So it's like, you're still my chosen people. This is still going to happen. It's like this reaffirmation of all this prophecy and of this plan, despite we've just learned a lot of the places they've kind of screwed up. Even Moses not obeying and trusting the Lord fully, so that
Gonna cost him.
It cost him deeply.
Yeah.
So it's not that disobedience is without consequence, but God is bigger than that.
I mean, in like New Testament says so many times, like, these things were written for our hope, for our teaching, for like, and just what you just said is like, that's what we're living right now. I mean, we haven't got it right in so many ways. I'm talking generally, historical. It's like, but he's determined. He's determined to make it happen. And we know the end of the story. Israel and the nation makes it. And he receives the glory. So we're not supposing things are going to happen. We know things are going to happen. We're just being invited to align to that narrative. Find identity and purpose in that narrative and proclaim that good news. It's so amazing. It's so amazing. And that tension with faithfulness and unfaithfulness and messing it up, but following him, it's just a beautiful tension. Full of grace. Full of grace. Grace was not created on Matthew. Has been there before. Very, very before. So, closing thoughts. Who has something to share? Sir?
Oh, I just look like I've got something to say.
You might have something. Not pressure, I'm just looking at you straightly.
Sometimes I think it just seems like such a huge task.
Oh.
You know, you just go. Oof. But we know that it's not every single person, it's a remnant, like you said. But it's just such a huge task. Yet, how we've seen the Lord move, bringing the Jew and the Gentile, even in just like our city here, which we hadn't seen 10, 20 years ago. So it's happening, but it just seems so huge sometimes.
Yes, it feels paramount.
Yeah.
Big. Yet, honestly, KL has been blessed to be a pioneer among the world of how Jews and Gentiles can worship together the same King. It's amazing. Amazing.
Aren't you kind of glad that the Lord had this part put in there in the midst of reading rebellion after rebellion after rebellion.
Oh, yeah.
And we even have a rebellion right after this that we'll be discussing next week. But in the midst of all of that, it's even like in the book of Jeremiah, in the midst of all the rebellion, the Lord speaks forth the new covenant. I mean, in the midst of all the rebellion, the Lord breaks in with that level of hope. Otherwise, this would be a really hard story to read if you didn't have the break-ins
Yeah.
of the prophetic destinies.
Yeah.
I believe that happens a lot with parenting. You're growing up, you're raising kids, and they have these seasons that we all went through, so it's not like they're for the first ones, but they're going through those seasons where everyone can tell they're being a little bit messed up. And a lot of people, I don't know what's the word, but the opposite of prudent, they're willing to share it out loud, even in front of them. I have seen this a lot, at least in Mexico it happens a lot, like, oh, that girl, that boy is very hyperactive, or that this, and they're willing to start calling names. And I have learned that that's the moment as parents that we need, even though that's true, and that's actually just one example, you have 100 more. So you actually know that has some truth in it. That's the moment to stand up and say like, hey, no, that's nothing. It's just being 6-year-old. He actually is like, pa, 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 or she's actually, pa, 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 pa. Or somebody in the grocery store say like, hey, you cannot touch it. It's like, hey, I have done this so many times. Like, hey, refer to me, not to them. You're good. Stay with me. So like, people are willing to like speak into the children's life. Going back to Israel narrative, the nations are willing to speak unto the world destiny. But the Lord is prophetically, ever since the beginning until right now, keep bringing voices to say, hey, no, don't follow your eyes only. This is what I'm saying, and it will be accomplished. So I think that's a good closing line to finish this morning. Thank you very much, everyone.